Thank you everyone for being here. Today is June 14th, and we are describing neurodivergence. We have two incredible and kind guest speakers today. We have the Liberal Party representative, Jennifer Maccarone, and we have the researcher at the Neuro Institute at McGill, Dr. Julie Scorah. And I invite all of you to give a warm welcome to all of them. And you could also research some of the involvements that they've had and all the kindness that they've shown for people in the neurodivergent community. And I will start now with allowing Jennifer Maccarone to continue this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's a pleasure for me to be with all of you this afternoon. It's a beautiful day out, so I'm extra grateful that people have taken the time to join us this afternoon. I know that we compete with weather sometimes, especially since our weather is a little bit up and down, so I'm really pleased to be here. Those of you who don't know me, it's not the first time that I've participated in one of these conferences. I'm Jennifer Macrone. I'm the M&A for Westmount St. Louis, and yes, I am one of the official opposition critics for the Liberal Party of Quebec. Although my doses have changed a little bit since this new session has started, and currently I am the official opposition critic for public security for the 2S LGBTQIA+ community, as well as for the fight against racism and sexual exploitation of minors. That being said, my prior dossiers were, I was the official spokesperson for people living with handicap or with the autism spectrum. And the reason why I was very involved in that is because although I love my job as an M&A, the most important role that I occupy is as mom of Sam and Bianca, who are two young adults who are both living with autism and are very successful with their lives, and it was really the impetus for me wanting to get involved. And that's why I think events such as this are so essential and so important. So thank you, Michael, for inviting me back to participate again, because really I think it's all about inclusion. It's all about demystification. I think the more that we talk about autism, neurodivergence, what is neurotypical, what is not neurotypical, the more the world will open up and the more that will create a common understanding and an openness to everybody who's, maybe doesn't fit into a box, into a singular definition. So I'm very grateful to be here. So in my role as an M&A, some of you might be less familiar with it. So M&A, member of the National Assembly. As an official opposition critic, I have the opportunity to represent not just the citizens of my district, but also speak to the dossiers that I have been asked to hold and to represent for my party. That being said, of course, I will always advocate for causes that are related to neurodivergence, atypical diagnoses for what I mentioned earlier, because it's a very personal cause for me. In addition to the roles that I occupy in the dossiers that I've already mentioned, I chair committees. I participate also in bills that are outside of my mandate. For example, I was the representative for my Liberal team for the recent bill that was adopted that is an extension of medical assistance in dying, a very important bill in Canada and Quebec in particular. We are leaders in this particular domain, and so it really is an honor for me to be a spokesperson for that. And of course, being a spokesperson means that I am the voice of those that I represent, and it's regardless of the language that people speak, it's regardless of the religion that they practice or if they don't practice, or where they live. What's very important to me is that I bring your voice forward, and that we are critical of the government in an effort to make sure that they are representing the interests of all Quebecers. So my advocacy work, as I was mentioning earlier, the inspiration for me has really been my kids, has really been Sam and Bianca, who are now 20 and 21. And I know that I look about the same age as my children, of course. I'm sure that you're all wondering how it is that I'm so young and I have kids that are 20 and 22. Years old, but that being said, it's changed me significantly. I never thought that I would be somebody who was advocating at the National Assembly in a role that was political, but my long-term goal and my long-term vision has always been one of an inclusive society, one of acceptance where everybody is valued, regardless of their abilities, regardless of their disabilities or the challenges that they face. I think that it's very important. So I started getting involved after my children received their diagnosis. Sam was 3 when he got his diagnosis, so that was 2004. We weren't talking about autism the way that we are today, or neurodivergence, because our definitions have also evolved and our understanding has evolved significantly since then, right? It's not like it was back in the day. I was alone in my basement with a computer, and the internet was a relatively new thing, and I found out all by myself what the diagnosis was, because at the time I didn't even have access to Anglophone services, and so I had to do my own translation. And that was very, very difficult. And I decided that I didn't want other parents to go through a similar experience as I did. And if I was going to advocate for my kids, then it meant I could advocate for other kids like them. So I got involved in school, very, very involved in school, from volunteering to chairing governing boards to chairing the parent committee for the school board, to becoming the president of my school board, to becoming the president of the Quebec English School Boards Association. And then ultimately, I had people knock on my door and ask me if I was going to bring that advocacy to another level. And so I was honored to be able to do so. And being an advocate for people that are living with challenges as an ally, because I fully recognize that I am not somebody who's living with autism spectrum disorder. And I never want to advocate for people that can certainly advocate for themselves. My goal is always to be a voice for those who cannot advocate for themselves, and to be an ally for those who can. And so some of the things that I've worked on at the National Assembly, key issues are the transition from youth to adult for people that have those challenges, who have a recognized handicap, because 18 years old, in not just in Quebec, but across Canada and many countries, as soon as you become an adult in the eyes of the law, then you lose your subsidies, you lose access to your services, you lose all the support that your family was receiving for you. You have to go through a process all over again to get all of that diagnosis. If you're leaving your youth education sector, you might be moving on to a cégep, college, or university. None of that transitions with you. And so it's like really starting over, and you're just in a void. And so whether you are the person that's going through it or your caregivers are there supporting you, it was something that I was living through at the time. And I still am. It's very difficult. It's not because I'm an M&A that I figured out all the solutions and I'm able to take care of everything. And so it's one of the things that I've been working very hard on for the past 5 years. And I think we've seen a little bit of progress. Most recently, and it's only been a couple months now, I deposited a bill that I'm hoping the government will call, and it's regarding forced school expulsions of kids that are living with challenges and disabilities. We see this in the daycare network. I've also deposited mandate initiatives, which are like mini bills. So we're asking the government in a short period of time to have an intense view and overview and review of the particular issue that we're highlighting. So for example, we talk about early intervention all the time. You can't do any early intervention if these kids can't make it into a daycare network or into the school network where we can help support them. That's what early intervention is, beyond all the wonderful things that our new doctors, our new dentists, our psychologists, and all of that support network will be able to do. So I recently deposited a bill to put an end to that, because regretfully, currently, and it's only the tip of the iceberg, we don't have all the statistics. There's roughly 2,500 students that are expelled from school or sent home against their will, without the approval or consent of their families, because our systems are not able to deal with them. And so we send them home, and we say that we're giving them an education if we give them 30 minutes of education a week. That's just not, that's not education. And by the same token, you got to give it to our education system and our daycare system. They are not the healthcare system, which is facing so many challenges to provide essential services like psychiatric support, like psychological support for people that are desperately in need. And so that's a big challenge that they face. So I've deposited the bill in the hopes that the government will call it and that we can put an end to it so that there's going to be an equal access to service. Other things that I've worked on are bills that are related to the public curator, which was a huge reform that took place in the previous legislature. And why it's important is because people that do require individuals to accompany them, we really want to do is respect their civil rights as much as possible. So one of the things that I'm very proud of is that Quebec now, since 2022, Quebecers have the right to vote, and which was something, so if you have a recognized handicap, including an intellectual disability, you were able to vote in a federal election, but you were never able to vote in a provincial election. And I think that that's something that we desperately needed to change, because the definition of somebody's handicap is not the same definition as somebody else. And if you really want to respect people's right to choose their autonomy, it's very important to give them as many civil liberties as you possibly can. So that's part of the reforms and things that I was working on that I'm very proud of. I know that everybody's always interested in the parent perspective. And as I mentioned, it's one of the reasons why I decided to get involved and take an active role in doing my best to represent the interests of my kids and kids like them. And I think that ultimately what's important for me as a key takeaway for you today is that parents, we worry. Parents in general worry, right? So everybody here has a parent. I guarantee you your parents are worried about you. It doesn't matter if you're an infant or an adult, your parents are concerned about you. That's just a normal state of affairs. When you're a parent of a child that has special needs, your worries, I would say, are more exponential. You are concerned about things that other parents aren't concerned about. For example, every day I get on the road, when I drive to Quebec City, I'm in Quebec City 3 days a week. That's just part of the job. So Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I'm in the house. And I leave at the last possible minute and I come back as soon as I possibly can, because every time I leave, my kids, I'm worried, and my kids are adults. I worry every day when I take the road, if I have an accident and something happens to me, what will happen to them in my absence? Because our society, from work to healthcare to education to social services, is not in a place where I know that my children would be cared for in my absence. And again, I reiterate, they're adults, and I know that they're going to live with me for the rest of my life, or be part of my life. They will require constant support. And so I think that it's important that whatever you're doing, when you're caring for your patient, when you're caring for your client, I think that it's extremely important that you always take into consideration that behind those kids, you've got the parents that are there, or their caregiver, the person that's there supporting them, who is probably struggling as much as your client or your patient, because they're concerned that they're not doing enough, that they won't be there, what happens when they're not around. And so I think that, and again, the system is not built to ensure long-term success for these people. So I think it's important that people take that into consideration. I know that there's lots of policy things that we could be talking about, and I don't want to bore you with that. You can ask me questions about it if you like, and we can talk more about policy and things that you'd like to see change. We're not investing enough at the government level. We're sorely lacking in amazing professionals like Dr. Scorah, for example. We need more people like her that are out there training more people like you to be able to do more to help people like my kids. So it really is this whole, it's not a circular economy, but it's really a circular solution. And there's not enough of that. It's part of that supportive society that I think everybody believes in when you're talking about policy change and advocacy. But it's never really the reality. And so it's a goal that we need to continue to work for and never give up hope on. And hopefully a little bit at a time, we'll see changes. Part of the changes I think that we've seen, at least I've seen a lot as a parent, is a lot of the definitions and the terms that we use and how we're more socially conscious of the terms that we're using. So for example, I'm very careful to not say, my kids are autistic. We don't say that anymore because it's not the one thing that defines who they are. They're Sam and Bianca, and they go to school and they have jobs and they have passions. They love music, they love video games, They have all the things that they're very, very involved in. And so terminology like what is neurodivergent, which is something that we talk more and more about. And I think that it's a great term when we're talking about the whole spectrum. Why? Because I have as a parent, maybe I have a real problem every time somebody uses the word normal. It's not normal. It makes my skin crawl because I don't know what normal is. I'm sure everybody who's participating today is normal. I don't know if I'm normal. You know, everybody's definition is going to be varied. So I think that neurodivergent is a really appropriate term for us to use when we're talking about atypical neurology. I think that, and I'm sure that Dr. Scorah will probably go a lot more into detail. I'm not a doctor, and so I don't want to mislead anybody on that. But for me as a parent, what I can tell you is it's a term that appeals to me because I absolutely hate the definition of normal. And so I think that it's a great way for us to be more inclusive in the terminology that we're using. And if we're going to really work toward an inclusive society and promote equity and talk about compassion, then I think that words matter. And a lot of it makes a big difference in how we use it, because there's no such thing as a one size fits all. And there's no such thing as one definition that works for everybody. And so if it's neurodivergent, again, because you can even say typical is too close to normal, I think that it's a great way for us to bridge a gap. You know, I think I was mentioning parents earlier, and why I think it's important that you always take into consideration the role of parents and the caregivers that are behind your clients or your patients that you're going to be working with, is because every parent's experience is also vastly different. As I mentioned to you, when I found out, I was in the basement of my house, and because I couldn't get access to Anglophone services, and so I had to go and look up what a TED was. C'est quoi un TED? Un trouble d'envahissement du développement. Mon Dieu, je sais pas c'était quoi. Puis it was a speech language pathologist who was the original person who got me on the path. I knew something was wrong. I think that's the other thing that I hope everybody takes into consideration, is that often parent insight is something that is not given its due consideration. I knew for a long time that there was something wrong with my kid, with my baby. I wasn't having a similar experience to my friends who all had children at the same time. I couldn't leave my home. If I did, there was an instant meltdown, and Sam was nonverbal. He was would hurt himself. So he looked like a kid that was getting beat up. And so I was worried when I go out that somebody's going to think that I'm not a good parent. And so it brings all of that concern. You're worried about the judgment that people are going to have, because there was certainly at that time no tolerance. There was not a lack of awareness. It was very, very different. And then 2 years later, my daughter was also diagnosed. And if it wasn't for Sam's diagnosis, I'm not sure that I would have recognized the signs, but it was a lot of people telling me, oh, don't worry, it's normal that your kids aren't talking. Your kids are learning English and French. It's normal that your kids are constantly melting down. I know it's not normal. I know that there's something wrong. And so I felt very diminished and disregarded. And I found that to be very challenging. And it was the same thing when my kids started school. There was a lot of people's either wanting to exclude them and put them in special classes. And I don't believe in that. I do 100% believe in inclusion. I think one of the reasons why my kids have been successful, and Sam had an original diagnosis of he was never going to get out of diapers. I was going to have to consider long-term placement. So, you know, you need to start thinking long-term what's going to happen, even though he's a child now. What resources can he build himself up? He's not going to get to go to a local school. Where are we going to educate him and things like that? And I think the other thing is that when a parent receives this kind of a diagnosis, it's a grieving process. And you never really recover from it. It's something that you carry with you forever. You learn to live with it like anything else. At the time, I remember wishing that somebody would, take me instead, just, do something, and what can I do? What can I give of myself to save my children from what I was perceiving to be a life that would be extremely difficult? And it has been very, very challenging, very challenging. But I was never alone, and so I think what helped me along the way was that, you know, that famous village that people talk about, the people that accompany you. And so that was very, very, very important to me, was the support that I received from my community, from my family, from my friends, although I let go a lot of those friends and started over, because when you're dealing with a family member who requires so much care, it does have a significant impact on you as a parent. I lost my marriage, I lost my job, I nearly lost my home, and it's you know, you give and then you start over. And if I'm here today and have seen any kind of success, it's because people didn't give up on me and people didn't give up on my kids. And so I think that it's very important. And that happened a lot was from the support system that I received within the education system, from psychologists who were there to help me and to help my kids. My kids benefited from ABA therapy. Well, Sam did, not Bianca. And that's the other thing, is a one-size-fits-all does not work for people that are neurodivergent. You really need to see the person and not limit them, because we often walk in with this idea of, oh, they won't be able to do this. And that's so not true. If I had stopped with what I had originally heard about Sam when he was 3, I don't think I would have had any hope to do anything for Bianca. So while ABA, and it's ABA across a lifespan. It's not just like 1 or 2 years. It's years and years and years and years and years to bring him to where he is today. It was a huge commitment. That was not something that was going to work for Bianca. And so we fully recognized that we had to do a complete alternative form of therapy that wasn't just one-on-one, that was more group, that was softer, slower, that was more adapted to her. And so I think it's really important that when you're working with people that you're going to be potentially supporting, is that you remember that there is no one size fits all, and you will have to adapt to each individual, just like you would for anybody who is not neurodivergent, anybody who is neurotypical, right? I think you're going to deal with every client or every person in a different way. We are a huge society with all these different personalities. And so I think that's something that's very, very important that we're talking about when we're talking about neurodivergence. I know that there's people, I think if I'm not mistaken, there's a lot of people that are studying to be dentists. Is that right? Who are here with us today? I'm not sure. But if that's the case, I thought I could talk a little bit about some of the experiences that I had as a parent, going through some of those earlier years with my kids. And if I can make some recommendations, I think that some of the things that are really important that would have helped me a lot at the time was a lot more support for the home before the meeting. Don't forget that, you know, we're all allies, and if we're all working for this common goal of trying to help our kids get access to services, anything that can be provided in advance of any appointment or any meeting is super helpful, whether it's a video or little tools or things that we can borrow and give back or whatever makes sense. But anything that you can give to help your caregivers sensitize your kids before they're going in for appointments, I think is super helpful. Just to give you an example, again, if we're talking about you know, dental health, in order for me to get my kids, and it's not like I never neglected it. You have kids, you're constant. The minute they have teeth, you're brushing their teeth. It's a rite of passage. But it took 2 of us to brush the kids' teeth. So it's not the kind of thing you can do alone. And we had to sit on them, you know, literally restrain them so that we could actually do any dental care. And it's a process. It took years before we were able to move into a place where there wasn't a sensory issue relating to that chore, relating to that life skill, until they could do it themselves and make sure that they were doing it well. And so, you know, fun toothbrushes, flavors and things, I'm sure that everybody has all of that. That doesn't always work. It didn't work for me. It was making it part of a routine and then using a lot of positive reinforcement that was helpful. We made it part of therapy. And so those are the things I think that are also very helpful. People can think of things like that. Visits, if you can have visits and I know a lot of it often comes down to expense, but it can just be a visit to the office, just to see, just to, again, get sensitized to a new place, to new sights, new sounds, new smells. I know we can adapt a lot of things. I think that that's definitely the way to go. And then beyond kids, I'd like to end on a note, because I think that my time is probably running out. But I think the other thing that I would implore all of you to do, because some of you will be going into the workforce, some of you will be hiring people, is to never forget that a lot of these people that have worked their way through the system, despite the fact that they have some neurodivergence, these are people that can be employed, that can be committed, that can work, and that are often not given the due consideration because we don't know how to integrate them into the workforce. And I say this because I'm also living this now. So I think that if we can think about how we can incorporate people that are living with differences that are maybe not like the traditional neurotypical person, then I think that's the way to go. In Canada, just to give you some statistics, only 1 in every 5 people with a diagnosed handicap is employed. Of those 1 in 5 people, 1 in every 7 has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. So there's very few people that are living with this diagnosis that are actually employed. And I think that that's something that as healthcare professionals, we need to consider of what we're doing to maybe train and recognize and accommodate differences in the workplace. I think it should almost start there so that we can help these people, again, be self-sufficient, be successful. I think that it's very, very important. We know that there's a lot of healthcare disparities, things that need to change. A lot of our people that are neurodivergent do not have access to healthcare. They have a much higher rate of suicide. These are things that we need to take into consideration. We don't have a system that's adapted for them. Not everybody can make a phone call. Not everybody is going to be adapted for a system to log in, also to get an appointment like Santé, for example. So I think that we also need to find a way to make our healthcare system more adapted and more accessible to people who are neurodivergent. So I think that in conclusion, because again, I'm looking at my clock, is I'm really pleased at an event like what's been organized this afternoon. To me, this is le nerf de la guerre. It's really what's going to change a lot of what we're doing and what we're seeing in our society is, again, having open conversations, having discussions, talking about solutions that we can work on together, or challenges that we've seen, so we can say, oh yeah, I've seen that before. Talking with parents, talking with people on the spectrum, talking with people like Dr. Scorah, talking with researchers, so that we can all do better to build that inclusive society. I believe that if we celebrate our differences, it's really what's going to make us stronger. And so I thank you very much for listening, and I will be available for questions, which I think are at the end. Thank you.
Truly, thank you so much, Ms. Macrone, and also for having the courage to talk deeply about your story and your personal connections. It was really important for us to hear. And also, thank you for mentioning the bills that you're supporting in support of the neurodivergent community. It's really, really beautiful to see that there's people in the government that are mindful of this and